Before we begin tonight's story, let me tell you what we're going to do together. We're going to travel back, very far back, to a time before pavement, one before noise, before the 10,000 small anxieties that follow you into bed at night. We're going to visit a world that was ancient, even when the oldest books were young. And at the center of that world, we're going to find a man, a family, a boat, and a God who never once stopped paying attention. Tonight's story is the Ark of Noah, but not the version you might be picturing. No disaster film. No dramatic waves crashing over the bow. What we're going to find instead is something much quieter, and I think much more beautiful. A cradle. A floating cradle, rocking gently on the face of the deep, full of sleeping creatures, held in the hands of the one who made them all. So, before we go any further, put your phone down for just a moment, or let it rest beside you. Adjust your pillow. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Take one slow breath in through your nose and let it out through your mouth. Good. You don't have to solve anything tonight. You don't have to be anywhere. You're just here, and we're going to listen to an old story together. Now, one small thing before we begin. Tell me in the comments, what city are you in right now? And what time is it where you are? I love knowing that people are listening from all over the world. From all kinds of bedrooms and living rooms and quiet corners of the earth. You don't have to say anything else. Just your city and the hour. That's enough. All right, let's go back. In the beginning, long before the story we're about to tell, the world was made with enormous care. That's the part we sometimes skip over too quickly. We move so fast to the flood, to the drama, to the ark, that we forget to stand still for a moment in the world that came before. But tonight, we're going to slow down. Because you can't understand what the ark meant without first understanding what the world felt like before the rain. Imagine a landscape without city lights. Stretch that image out as far as you can. Rolling hills that no road has ever crossed. Valleys where rivers run cold and clear over smooth stones. And the sound of that water has been the only music anyone in that valley has ever known. Great plains where the grass bends and rises with the wind like something breathing. Forests so old and dense that the light coming through the canopy turns green before it reaches the ground. The sky at night, in that world, was something people today have almost entirely forgotten. There were no electric lights anywhere on Earth. No orange glow on the horizon from a distant city. Just darkness. Vast, clean, velvety darkness. And against that darkness, more stars than the mind can comfortably hold. On a clear night, you could see the arm of the galaxy stretched from one edge of the sky to the other. Like a river of pale light someone had poured across the heavens. People slept earlier in that world. when the sun went down, the world went dark. And the body knew what to do. You would bank the fire, pull a rough woven blanket over your shoulders, and let the sound of the night come in. The insects, the distant owls, the occasional low movement of cattle settling down in their pens. Sleep came naturally, the way it does when the body is tired from real work and the mind hasn't been assaulted by 100 glowing screens. Life was built around simple, recurring rhythms. The rising and setting of the sun, the turn of the seasons, the planting and the harvest, the rains that came when they were expected, and the dry winds that followed. There was a kind of deep grammar to the world, a set of patterns so old and reliable that people built their entire understanding of life around them. The sun will rise, the seeds will grow, the river will run. God is in his place, and we are in ours. And it was a world, in other words, that still knew how to be still. And yet, something had been shifting, and slowly, for a very long time. You know how a room can feel different before an argument? The air changes. The silences get a different texture. Everyone is still going through the motions, passing the bread, asking ordinary questions. But there's a thickness to everything, a pressure that hasn't broken yet. The world in Noah's time had been carrying that feeling for generations. The ancient text says simply that the earth was corrupt and filled with violence. Those words might sound dramatic and far away, but if you sit with them quietly, they describe something recognizable. A world where people had slowly, incrementally stopped treating each other, and the earth itself, with care. Where the small dishonesties had piled up into a mountain. Where the quiet voice that used to say this is not right had been ignored so many times that people had stopped hearing it at all. It wasn't that every person was monstrous. It's rarely that simple. It was more that the accumulated weight of 1,000 small failures, the selfishness that went unchecked, the cruelty that became normalized, the sacred things that got treated as ordinary, had pressed down on the world until something fundamental had bent out of shape. The grammar of creation, those deep patterns of rising and setting and planting and resting, had been ignored for so long that the world itself had become unstable. God looked at what he had made and grieved. That word matters. The ancient text doesn't say God was merely angry, though surely that's part of it. It says he grieved. There is something in that word that is softer and more devastating than anger alone. You grieve over something you love that has been damaged. You grieve when a beautiful thing has been broken. God looked at the world he had spoken into existence. The stars, the rivers, the creatures, the people made in his own image, and felt the weight of what had been lost. If you have ever loved something deeply and watched it deteriorate, you understand something of what that grief is like. If you have ever looked at a relationship, or a community, or your own heart, and thought, this is not what it was supposed to be, then you are standing in a small way in the place where God stood. But grief in God does not lead to abandonment. That is the thing the flood story is really about. If you follow it all the way to the end, it leads, instead, to a new beginning. A painful one, a costly one, but a beginning nonetheless. And in the middle of all of it, there was one man. His name was Noah. The text introduces him with extraordinary economy. It doesn't describe what he looked like. It doesn't tell us whether he was tall or short, whether he had a quick temper or a slow smile, whether he was good at conversations or preferred to keep to himself. What it tells us is this: Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. Walked with God. That phrase is worth turning over slowly in your hands, the way you might turn a smooth stone. It doesn't say Noah was perfect. The word blameless in the ancient language carries the sense of wholeness, of integrity, not the absence of failure, but the presence of a genuine orientation toward what is right. It means that when Noah got something wrong, he didn't cover it over and pretend. He brought it back into the light. He stayed in the conversation with God. And that conversation, that ongoing, daily, ordinary walking with, was apparently what distinguished him in a world that had mostly stopped listening. There is something deeply encouraging about that, if you sit with it. Noah wasn't distinguished by superhuman spiritual powers. He wasn't a mystic who had visions every night. He was a man who, in the middle of a world that was moving in one direction, kept walking in another. Not dramatically, not with great fanfare, just steadily, consistently, day after day, in the same direction. He got up in the morning and paid attention to God. He went about his work and kept listening. He lay down at night and rested in that same quiet awareness. That was the whole of it, and it was enough. Picture him on an ordinary evening. In the time before any of this began, the sun is going down over the hills to the west, and the light is that particular shade of amber that makes everything look warm and slightly unreal, the way the world looks in a half-remembered dream. Noah is sitting outside his dwelling, perhaps on a simple wooden bench, perhaps on a flat stone worn smooth by years of use. The fire inside the house is sending a thin curl of smoke up into the cooling air. Somewhere nearby, the sound of his wife preparing the evening meal. The lower voices of his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, talking to each other about something ordinary. The animals on his land are settling for the night. A donkey has stopped braying and stands with its head lowered, one back foot cocked in that particular posture of total equine relaxation. The goats are folding their legs beneath them in the pen. A dog has curled into a circle near the door. Noah watches the last light leave the sky. The first stars appear. 1, then 3, then more than you can count. He doesn't know yet what is coming. He doesn't know that within days, or weeks, or whatever span of time passes between this ordinary evening and the morning when God speaks to him, his entire life is about to be redirected into something that will make no sense to anyone around him for a very long time. He just sits with the stars and the settling animals and the smell of wood smoke and whatever it is that passes between a man and God in the quiet. And God watches him. And something is decided. Tonight, as you settle into your own rest, let that image stay with you for a moment. A man sitting quietly at the end of an ordinary day, not doing anything spectacular. Just present. Just listening. Just faithful to the small, daily habit of keeping his heart turned in the right direction. That is where this whole story begins. Not with a dramatic vision, not with a thunderclap, with a man who got up every morning and walked with God, and a God who noticed and remembered and was about to do something about it. The rain hasn't started yet. The ark hasn't been built. The animals are still scattered across the wide earth, going about their animal business, completely unaware that someone is about to invite them all on the most remarkable journey of their lives. But the door is about to open, and inside, eventually, it will be warm. Rest now. Let the image of that quiet evening hold you. The amber light, the curling smoke, the stars coming out one by one. You don't have to figure anything out tonight. You just have to be here, the way Noah was just there, and let the story carry you the rest of the way. We'll pick it up again soon. There is a particular kind of morning that feels different from all the others. You've had them before? Probably. You wake up and the light coming through the window looks the same as it always does. And the sounds outside are the same sounds. Birds, wind, the distant movement of the world going about its business. And yet something in the quality of the air has shifted. Something is different, though you couldn't say exactly what. It's as if the day itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen that it already knows about and you don't yet. Noah had a morning like that. We don't know the exact hour. We don't know whether he was standing in his field, or kneeling by the river, or simply sitting in that same quiet place where we left him the night before. The ancient text doesn't give us those details, and I think perhaps that's intentional, because what matters is not the setting. What matters is what was said. God spoke to Noah, and what God said was this: I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. But I want you to build something. Let's stay with that for a moment, because the way God speaks here is worth noticing. There is no clap of thunder, no earth-shaking dramatic entrance. The ancient text simply records the words, the way you might record a conversation between two people who know each other well enough to skip the formalities. There is grief in what God says. You can feel it just beneath the surface. The weight of a decision that has not been made lightly. But there is also something else. Something that might be easy to miss if you're moving too quickly. There is a plan. Not just judgment. Not just an ending. A plan for continuation. For preservation. For beginning again. Before God says anything about rain or floodwaters, before any of the difficult things are mentioned, He says, I want you to build something. That sequence matters. The creation comes before the destruction in God's mind. The ark exists in God's intention before the flood does. Which means that from the very beginning, the story of Noah is not really a story about water. It's a story about a boat, about a shelter, about a place God prepared for His creatures before the storm arrived. A cradle built before the storm. Now, try to imagine what it felt like to be Noah in that moment. He is a man of faith. Yes. He walks with God. Yes. But he is also a human being. Standing in an ordinary landscape, being asked to do something that has no precedent in the history of the world. No one had ever built an ark before. There was no blueprint to consult, no tradition to follow, no neighbor he could call over to say, I'm thinking of constructing a massive vessel in the middle of dry land. What do you think? And the instructions, when they came, were extraordinarily specific. The length, the width, the height, the rooms to be built inside, the wood to be used. Gopher wood, which most scholars believe was a dense, resinous timber, chosen for its durability and its resistance to water. The coating of pitch inside and out. A patient, labor-intensive process of waterproofing every surface, every joint, every seam. A window near the top, a door in the side, 3 decks. God gave Noah the dimensions of something that had never existed. And Noah, and this is the quiet miracle of the whole story, went and got his tools. I want to spend some time here, because I think this part of the story gets overlooked in the rush toward the more dramatic moments. The building of the ark was not a quick thing. Ancient tradition suggests it took decades. Some accounts say 100 years. We can't be entirely certain of the timeline. But what the text makes absolutely clear is that this was a long, slow, unglamorous project. Not a vision that arrived fully formed. Not a miracle that appeared overnight. A construction project carried out by human hands, one piece of timber at a time, in full view of a community that thought the whole thing was incomprehensible. Think about what that means in practical terms. Every morning, Noah woke up and went back to work on the ark. When the sun was hot, he worked on the ark. When his neighbors walked by and shook their heads, he worked on the ark. When the questions came, and they must have come, because people always ask questions about the strange thing the strange man is building in his yard. He kept working on the ark. When the project felt too large, when the end was too far away to see, when doubt crept in at the edges of his certainty, he picked up his tools and went back to work on the ark. There is a kind of faith that is loud and dramatic and visible. The faith of the mountaintop, the sudden revelation, the burning bush. And then there is this other kind of faith, the kind that shows up in work clothes and keeps going. The kind that doesn't require the feeling of certainty to take the next step. The kind that says, I don't understand everything about this. I can't see the end from here. But I was given a task, and I'm going to keep doing it. That is the faith Noah modeled, day after day, for years. Picture the work site on an ordinary afternoon. The sun is high and warm, and the smell of fresh-cut timber is thick in the air. That clean, sharp, resinous smell that gets into your clothes and stays there. The ark is beginning to take shape. Its massive ribs curving up from the keel like the bones of some enormous creature coming slowly to life. Sawdust drifts in the light. The sound of tools, the rhythmic thud of a mallet, the long rasp of a plane moving along a beam creates a kind of slow, repetitive music. Noah's sons are there too, working alongside their father. Shem, the eldest, carefully fitting a joint. Ham, bent over a length of timber, measuring twice before he cuts. Japheth, hauling freshly cut planks from the woodpile, their wives moving in and out of the scene, bringing water and food, calling out to each other across the noise of the work. It is, in most ways, an ordinary scene of labor. People working together toward a shared goal, tired at the end of the day, sleeping soundly because their bodies have been genuinely used. And yet, this ordinary labor is building something extraordinary. Every plank that gets fitted into place is an act of trust. Every joint sealed with pitch is a small prayer made physical. Every day of work is a day of saying, without words, I believe you. I don't fully understand, but I believe you. And so I'll keep building. The neighbors, we can imagine, were not always kind about it. Human nature doesn't change very much across the centuries. When someone does something that doesn't fit the established pattern, that makes a different set of choices, that seems to be listening to a voice no one else can hear, people notice, and they have feelings about it. Perhaps some were simply curious, stopping to watch for a while before moving on. Perhaps others were gently skeptical, offering their opinions with the particular confidence of people who have never tried to build something they don't understand. Perhaps a few were unkind in the way that people sometimes are when someone else's certainty makes them uncomfortable with their own uncertainty. But here's what the text records about Noah's response to all of it. Nothing. Or rather, It records his obedience, which amounts to the same thing. He didn't get into arguments. He didn't hold press conferences. He didn't spend his evenings drafting lengthy explanations of his theological position to share with the community. He built. He sealed. He fitted. He measured. He built some more. There is a profound peace in that image, if you let yourself feel it. The peace of a person who has been given a clear task and has decided to simply do it, regardless of what the noise around them says. The peace of someone whose identity is not dependent on being understood by the people watching them. Noah knew something that takes most of us a lifetime to learn, that when God has told you what to do, the opinions of everyone who disagrees are not unimportant, exactly, but secondary. You can hold them gently and keep building. And then, after all the long years of work, the day came when it was finished. I imagine Noah standing back and looking at what his hands and his son's hands had made. This enormous structure, rising up from the dry land like something from another world. The smell of pitch still fresh in the air. The interior divided into its rooms and stalls, ready to receive whatever was coming. The single door in the side, waiting to be opened. Did he feel satisfied? Probably. Did he feel some mixture of awe and disbelief that this thing which had lived for so long only in God's words and his own imagination was now a physical reality he could walk around and touch? I think almost certainly. Did he know exactly what was coming? Probably not entirely. Faith often works that way. You do the next thing that's asked of you, and the fuller picture reveals itself in stages. But the ark was ready, and now God would fill it. As you drift toward sleep tonight, let this image rest with you. A structure built slowly, faithfully, without drama or applause, built in the middle of a world that didn't understand it, by a man who kept showing up anyway. Built not because Noah could see the whole plan from beginning to end, but because he trusted the one who could. You may have something like that in your own life. Something you've been asked to keep building, even when the progress is slow and the people around you don't quite understand what you're doing. Something that requires the unglamorous, daily faith of picking up your tools and going back to work. If you do, Noah's story is for you. The ark gets built one plank at a time. The important thing is to keep going. And on the days when you can't see the end, remember, God could see it from the beginning. He knew what the finished thing would look like before the first piece of wood was ever cut. He still does. Rest now. Let the sound of the work settle. The distant rhythm of mallet on timber. The soft rasp of tools. The smell of sawdust and fresh pine on the evening air. The ark is nearly ready. Tomorrow, something wonderful is going to happen. The animals are coming. There is a moment in the very early morning, just before the sun has fully risen, when the world belongs entirely to the animals. You may have experienced this if you've ever been awake at that hour. Not the middle of the night, but that particular threshold time, 4 or 5 in the morning, when the darkness is beginning to soften at the edges, but the light hasn't quite committed to arriving yet. The birds begin first. Not all at once, but one at a time, tentatively, as if each one is checking whether it's really time. Then another, then a dozen more. And gradually, underneath the bird song, you begin to hear the other sounds, the low movements of larger creatures, the rustling in the undergrowth, the distant sound of something large and unhurried making its way through the trees. In that hour, before the human world wakes up and fills everything with its noise and its purposes, you can feel that the earth has its own life, its own rhythms, its own unhurried business that has nothing to do with us. On the morning the animals came to the ark, I imagine the world felt something like that. The text says it plainly, and then moves on quickly, the way ancient texts often do with the most astonishing things. The animals came to Noah, 2 by 2, male and female. Every kind of creature that breathes and moves upon the earth. They came to him. Noah didn't have to go out and capture them, or tranquilize them, or build elaborate traps. He didn't have to organize expeditions to distant continents to collect species he'd never seen before. The animals. But from the largest to the smallest, from the most familiar to the most exotic, simply came. Walking, padding, waddling, slithering, fluttering, lumbering toward the ark, as if they had all received the same quiet instruction from somewhere deep in their animal nature and had simply decided to obey it. There is something in that image that I find almost unbearably tender. These creatures, who have no theology, no capacity for abstract faith, no ability to weigh the pros and cons of trusting an invisible God, they simply came when they were called. They followed something they couldn't explain, toward a destination they couldn't understand. And in doing so, they were preserved. Let's slow down and actually watch this happen. Because I think if we move through it too quickly, we miss something beautiful. It's late afternoon. Perhaps the light is going golden and long, the way it does in the hour before sunset, laying itself in warm stripes across the grass. Noah and his family are standing near the great door of the ark, and the world around them has grown very quiet. Not the empty quiet of absence, but the full, watchful quiet of something about to happen. And then, from the tree line at the edge of the clearing, something moves. At first, it's hard to see clearly. Just a shape, and then another shape beside it, moving in that careful, deliberate way that animals move when they're uncertain of new terrain. And then they step out into the open, and you can see them. 2 deer, a buck, and a doe, picking their way across the grass with their heads slightly lowered. Their large, dark eyes taking in the enormous structure in front of them with an expression that is equal parts wariness and something that looks, somehow, like recognition. They pause at the foot of the ramp. The doe lifts her head and tests the air. Then, as if something has been settled, she walks forward. The buck follows. And behind them, from every direction now, more are coming. Imagine the sounds of it. The low, resonant rumble of elephants moving through the trees. A sound you feel as much as hear. A vibration in the earth beneath your feet. The particular clicking sound that accompanies a giraffe's stately, unhurried walk. Its impossibly long neck swaying gently with each step. The soft, repetitive pad of lion paws on dry grass. And here is one of the quietest miracles embedded in this whole scene. The lions are walking past the deer without so much as a sideways glance. The lambs are grazing within arm's reach of the wolves, and no one is alarmed. Something has been suspended. The old hungers, the predator-prey dynamics that govern nearly every interaction in the animal kingdom, have been set aside. At least for now. At least for this. The creatures are moving together toward a common shelter. And in this strange processional, the old enmities are irrelevant. Picture the smaller creatures, too. The tortoises, making their patient, geological timescale progress toward the ramp. Not hurrying, not capable of hurrying, and yet somehow perfectly on schedule. The rabbits, bounding in quick, nervous bursts and then freezing, and then bounding again. The beetles, the mice, the snakes moving in their fluid sidewinding way through the grass. Every creature finding its place in this enormous, unhurried procession. And the birds. Oh, the birds. They would have come in waves, filling the air above the ark with color and sound. The parrots and the starlings and the finches and the herons, wheeling and settling and wheeling again. The air alive with wing beats and calls, until, gradually, pair by pair, they found their way through the window at the top and settled into the upper decks, tucking their heads under their wings, going quiet. Noah stands at the door and watches them come. What does a man feel in a moment like this? I've thought about this, and I think the honest answer is probably a complicated mixture of things. Awe. Certainly. The kind of awe that makes you very still, that makes you feel simultaneously very small and very held. The awe of witnessing something that no human logic can fully account for. Something that can only be described as grace made visible. And underneath the awe, perhaps, a kind of tender responsibility. Because each of these creatures that files past him is being entrusted to his care. The elephants and the dormice, the eagles and the earthworms, the creatures he recognizes and the creatures he's never seen before. They are all placing themselves, in some inarticulate animal way, into the keeping of this one family. That is not a small thing to hold. And perhaps, underneath everything else, a quiet gratitude. Not the loud, performed gratitude of someone making sure God knows they're grateful. The deep, private, almost wordless gratitude of someone who has been trusted with something extraordinary and knows it. The interior of the ark, as the animals settle in, takes on a quality that I want to try to describe carefully, because it's central to the whole image we're building tonight. It becomes warm. Not warm the way a room gets warm when a fire is lit, though there are lamps burning. Small clay oil lamps casting pools of amber light in the dimness. Warm the way a space becomes warm when it's full of living bodies, each one generating its own quiet heat. The ark fills with the combined warmth of thousands of creatures breathing together in the dark. And that warmth has a particular quality to it. Dense, animal, alive. The smell of hay and feathers and damp fur. The sound in the settling dark of 1,000 different kinds of breathing. The slow, deep breath of the large mammals, the quick flutter of the birds, the barely perceptible respiration of the smallest creatures curled in their corners. It is, against all expectation, deeply, profoundly cozy. This enormous vessel, built for survival, built to withstand the end of the world as everyone knew it. It feels, in this moment, like a den, like a nest, like the inside of a burrow on a cold night, when everything that matters is warm and present and accounted for. God has been thinking about this. You realize the 3 decks, the individual rooms, the careful dimensions. All of it was designed not just for structural integrity, but for habitability, for comfort, for the long duration of the journey ahead. God was not merely preserving specimens. He was creating a home. Noah's wife moves through the lower deck as the last of the evening light fades, checking on the animals, making sure each creature has water, has bedding, has found its space. She pauses beside a pair of young camels who are folding their knobby legs beneath them with that particular camel expression of dignified inconvenience. And she rests her hand briefly on the neck of the nearer one. The camel turns its head and regards her with its long-lashed, ancient-looking eyes, and then looks away, apparently satisfied. Shem is up on the second deck, filling feed troughs. Ham is below, arranging fresh hay in the larger stalls. Japheth, at the top of the ramp, is counting, and quietly, methodically, making sure everyone is present and accounted for. The ark is full. Outside, the sky to the west is the color of old embers. Deep red shading to purple, shading to the first dark blue of coming night. The stars are beginning to appear. The air is very still. There is a quality to the evening that is different from other evenings. A held breath quality. A sense of a page about to be turned. Noah walks the length of the ark one last time, moving slowly through the warm dimness, listening to the sound of all that breathing. He checks the pitch ceiling on the lower joints. He touches the great beams with his hand, feeling the solidity of the wood, the craft of years of work made real and permanent beneath his palm. He is as much as any human being can be, at peace. And then, quietly, from the outside, the door swings closed. Not Noah's doing. The text is clear about this. In its understated way, God closed the door. God sealed them in. The same hands that had given Noah the dimensions, that had spoken the plan into existence before the first drop of rain fell, reached out and closed the door of the ark. Noah didn't have to manage this. He didn't have to figure out how to seal a door of that size from the inside. He didn't have to worry about whether it was properly secured. The one who had asked him to build this thing was the one who would close it when the time came. The sound of the door closing would have been enormous. A deep, resonant boom, felt as much as heard. A sound that said, finished, complete, sealed, safe. And in the silence that followed, the animals slept. Tonight, as your own eyes grow heavy, let that image be yours for a moment. The door closed by a hand that is not yours. The shelter prepared before you knew you needed it. The warmth of being held in a space that was designed with care to keep you through whatever is coming. You don't have to secure the door tonight. You don't have to worry about whether the seams will hold. Someone else has thought about that. Someone else has been thinking about it for longer than you know. The animals trusted that. They walked through the door and curled up in the warm dark and went to sleep. You can do that too. The door is closed. You are inside. The storm hasn't started yet. But when it does, you will be held. Rest now. Let the warmth of the ark settle around you. The soft sounds of breathing, the smell of hay and wood smoke, and the particular deep warmth of a sheltered place on the edge of a great storm. Everything is accounted for. Everyone is present. Sleep is coming. Gentle as the animals settling into their stalls. One by one, in the warm and lamplit dark. There is a particular kind of evening that only comes once. Most evenings are part of a series. You go to sleep, knowing, in some quiet background way, that tomorrow will arrive and the familiar rhythms will resume. The morning light through the same window, the same sounds from the same street, the same sequence of small, ordinary things that make up a life. The continuity is so reliable that you stop noticing it. It becomes the water you swim in. Invisible, because it's always there. But occasionally, rarely, and usually only recognized in retrospect, there is an evening that is genuinely the last of its kind. The last evening before something changes permanently. The last night of a particular chapter. The last time the world will look exactly like this. Feel exactly like this. Smell exactly like this. Noah's family had one of those evenings. They didn't know. As they moved through the familiar motions of the last ordinary night, that ordinary was ending. Or perhaps they did know, in the way that people sometimes know things they haven't yet fully admitted to themselves. A knowing that lives in the body, rather than the mind. That shows up as a particular attentiveness to small things. A tendency to pause and look around at what's in front of you for a moment longer than usual. Let me try to take you there. The ark is sealed. The animals are settling. Outside, the world is going about its final, ordinary evening, with complete unawareness of what tomorrow will bring. Somewhere in the distance, there is the sound of other people's lives. A dog barking. The faint sound of voices carrying across the still air. The low of cattle being brought in for the night. The same sounds that have accompanied every evening of Noah's life. The sounds of the world he knows. Inside the ark, the quality of the air is different from anything Noah's family has experienced before. Warmer? Obviously. Warmer than any enclosed space they've been in. Because of the sheer density of animal life surrounding them on all three decks. But also somehow quieter. In a particular way. The outside world's sounds are muffled by the thick wooden walls and the pitch-sealed joints, arriving as if from a great distance. And the sounds inside, the breathing, the occasional shift of a large body in its stall, the rustle of birds adjusting their position on their perches, are soft and repetitive and almost hypnotic. It is the sound of a world that has already arrived somewhere safe and knows it. Noah's wife is doing what women have always done at the end of a long day of extraordinary events, making sure everyone is fed. There is something grounding about that. The world is on the edge of the most significant event in human history. And she is moving through the ark with clay pots of lentils and flatbread, still warm from the morning's baking. Making sure her sons and their wives have eaten. Pausing to check on the animals nearest the family's living quarters. Filling water vessels. Arranging sleeping pallets. This is not smallness. This is the deepest kind of wisdom. The understanding that the body still needs tending even when the spirit is full of awe. That love expresses itself most reliably, not in grand gestures, but in the 10,000 small acts of care that sustain life from one day to the next. She has been doing these things alongside her husband for decades. She will keep doing them inside this ark for as long as it takes. The daughters-in-law are helping the three young women who have, by virtue of marrying into this particular family, ended up here, in this sealed wooden vessel, on the edge of everything. They are not named in the ancient text. And I've always found that a small sadness. They gave up the world they knew to be part of this story. And the story doesn't even remember their names. But their presence is real. Their contribution is real. And on this last evening before the rain, they are here. And they are helping. And that matters enormously. The sons are quieter than usual tonight. Shem, the eldest, sits with his back against the curved wall of the ark, a lamp burning low beside him, and stares at nothing in particular with the expression of a man whose mind is somewhere far away. He has believed in his father's faith all his life. He helped build this ark with his own hands, driving nails and fitting planks and hauling timber for years. He knows the plan. And yet, sitting here tonight in the sealed dark of this vessel, surrounded by the breathing of 1,000 animals, the reality of it has arrived in a new way. It's one thing to believe in something. It's another thing to be inside it. With the door closed, Ham is moving around more than necessary, checking things that don't need to be checked, adjusting hay that doesn't need to be adjusted. This is what some people do with anxiety. They fill the space with motion, with small useful tasks, with the comfort of their own competence. There is nothing wrong with this. It is a very human way of managing the feeling that something enormous is approaching. Japheth, the youngest, has found his way to the upper deck and is sitting near the window. The single window built near the top of the ark, looking out at the night sky. The stars are very bright tonight. He's watching them with the particular intensity of someone who suspects, correctly, that this is the last time for a while that he'll be able to see them clearly. And Noah is praying, not out loud, not in the performed way of someone who wants to be seen praying. He is sitting in the corner that has become his corner, in the small space that has been arranged as a kind of family gathering place on the middle deck. And he is simply present with God in the way that he has been present with God his entire life. The same quiet conversation, the same open-handed posture of a man who has nothing to hide and nothing to prove. What does he pray on the last night before the flood? I don't think he prays for protection. He's already been given that, and he trusts it. I don't think he prays for clarity. He's had more clarity about this particular task than most people receive about anything. I think he prays the prayer of a man who is about to witness something devastating, and who needs to hold it rightly. He prays for the people outside. He grieves the way God grieves for a world that has arrived at this point. He holds the sadness of it without letting it crush him. And then, I imagine, he rests. He rests the way a man rests who has done everything he was asked to do. And now the next part of the story belongs to God. Outside, the night deepens. The stars wheel slowly overhead in their ancient courses. The same stars that have been present over every human evening since the beginning. The same stars that will still be present when all of this is over. The air is unusually still. No wind. The animals outside, the ones that were not called to the ark, have grown quiet in that particular way that animals sometimes do before a significant weather event, tucked into their dens and burrows and nests, not knowing exactly what is coming, but knowing, in the way that the body knows things before the mind does, that something is different tonight. The grasses stand perfectly still. The surface of the nearest river is flat and dark and reflects the stars without a ripple. Even the insects have stopped. The world is holding its breath. Inside the ark, one by one, the lamps are turned low. Noah's wife settles onto her pallet and closes her eyes, the way she has done every night of her long life, with the reliable and practiced ease of a woman who has learned that rest is not a luxury, but a form of trust. Sleep comes to her gently. The daughters-in-law settle in together, close enough that their warmth mingles, murmuring to each other in low voices about ordinary things, the kind of soft, sideways conversation that women have in the dark, not quite about what it's really about, but comforting in its ordinariness, in its proof that the familiar is still here, even here. Shem stops staring at the middle distance and lies down. His eyes stay open for a while, fixed on the curved ceiling above him, tracing the grain of the wood in the lamplight. And then, gradually, they close. Ham stops adjusting things that don't need adjusting and finds his pallet and sits on it and then lies down. And the restless energy drains out of him all at once, the way it does when a body that has been holding tension finally gives up, trying to manage everything, and simply surrenders to exhaustion. Japheth stays at the window the longest. He watches the stars until his eyes grow heavy, and then he leans his head against the thick wooden frame, and the stars blur softly at the edges, and the blur becomes the inside of his eyelids. And Noah lies down in his corner, in the warm, breathing dark, surrounded by the sound of his family's rest and the deeper, broader sound of thousands of creatures sleeping peacefully all around him. Above him, below him, the ark smells of timber and pitch and hay and animal warmth. The lamp nearest him has burned down to its last small flame, throwing a circle of amber light on the ceiling that flickers very gently with some air current, too subtle to feel. He thinks about tomorrow, and then he lets go of tomorrow. He thinks about the years of work, the long, slow building, the neighbors and the questions and the pitch-stained hands. And then he lets go of all of that too. He thinks about the world outside, the last evening of the world he has always known. He holds it tenderly for a moment, the way you hold something you love that you're about to set down. And then, with the particular grace of a man who has spent a lifetime learning to trust, he lets go of that as well. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to manage or worry or plan. There is only this: the warm dark, the breathing, the faint amber light, the presence of the ones he loves, And somewhere, just above and underneath and through all of it, the same quiet awareness that has accompanied him every day of his life. He closes his eyes. Outside, in the deep stillness before the first drop falls, the world waits. The door is sealed. The family sleeps. The animals sleep. The lamps burn low and lower. And somewhere above the cloudless sky, above the stars that Japheth was watching until his eyes closed, something is gathering, not with malice, not in anger alone, but with the sorrowful, purposeful intention of a God who is doing a hard thing because he loves what he made too much to let it continue as it is. The rain is coming, but not yet. For now, there is only the silence, and the sleeping, and the sealed door, and the stillness of a world on the last edge of what it has always been. For now, everyone inside is safe, and warm, and held, and that is enough. Let that settledness find you now, wherever you are. The door is closed on this day. Whatever it held, its worries, its unfinished business, its small failures and its unexpected graces, it's behind you now. You are inside something sealed and solid and cared for. The walls around you are thick. The warmth is real. The people you love are near. You don't have to hold tomorrow tonight. Tomorrow hasn't arrived yet. There is only this moment, this breath, this slowly deepening quiet. Let your body be heavy. Let your mind grow soft at the edges, like Japheth's stars blurring into sleep. Let the breathing of the ark, all that warm animal life, all that trusting rest, become the rhythm of your own chest rising and falling. The last lamp is guttering. The world outside is very still. Sleep is here, patient as the rain that is coming, gentle as the hand that closed the door. Let it take you. The first drop fell before anyone inside was awake to hear it. It landed on the roof of the ark, on the highest point of the curved wooden ceiling, where the timber was thickest and the pitch seal was deepest. And the sound it made was very small, a single tap, light as a fingertip, the kind of sound that, on any ordinary night, you would not notice at all. The kind of sound that belongs entirely to the world outside and has nothing to do with the warm interior where people sleep. But it was the beginning of everything. A second drop followed, then 3 more. Irregular, tentative, as if the sky itself was still deciding. Then a handful, then more, and then, with the slow inevitability of something that has been building for a very long time, finally arriving at its moment, the rain began in earnest. Inside the ark, Noah was the first to wake. Not with alarm, or at least not with the sharp, heart-pounding alarm of someone startled by danger, more with the quiet, attentive waking of a man whose body has learned, over a long lifetime, to notice things. He lay still for a moment in the warm, dark, listening. His wife breathed steadily beside him. The animals were quiet, and above him, through the thick wooden ceiling, the sound was growing. Rain. He had heard rain his entire life. He knew every register of it. The light, scattered rain of early spring. The heavy summer downpours that turned the ground to mud in minutes. The long, soft rains of autumn that lasted for days and left everything smelling of wet earth and green things. He knew rain the way a man knows something he has grown up with. Something so familiar it has become part of the texture of ordinary life. But this sound was different. It was not different in the way of a particularly heavy storm. Louder than usual, more dramatic. It was different in a way that was harder to name. There was a quality to it, a depth and a breadth that suggested something beyond weather. As if the rain was not falling on the ark alone, but on everything, in every direction, as far as the earth extended. As if it was coming not just from the clouds above, but from somewhere more fundamental, more vast. Noah lay still and listened to it and understood, with a certainty that settled in his chest like a stone finding its place at the bottom of still water, that this was it. This was the thing he had been building toward for all those years. This was the moment the door had been sealed for. He closed his eyes again and breathed and let the understanding settle. The rain, in those first hours, had a rhythm to it that was almost musical. On the curved roof of the ark, it built gradually from scattered drops to a steady drumming. Not frantic, not violent, but persistent, unwavering. A sound like 10,000 small drummers, all keeping perfect time. It moved across the wooden surface in sheets, running down the sloped sides and falling from the edges in thin curtains of water that caught the very first gray light of a dawn that would not really come today. Not in any meaningful way. The animals began to wake. Not with panic. And this is the thing I want you to hold on to, because it is at the very heart of what this story means for us tonight. The animals woke not with panic, but with something closer to mild curiosity. The way creatures respond to unfamiliar sounds when they are warm and fed and enclosed in a safe space. The horses shifted in their stalls and tossed their heads and settled again. The birds ruffled their feathers and resettled them. The larger mammals, the elephants, who can hear frequencies of sound far below what human ears can detect, stood very still for a moment, with their enormous heads slightly raised, listening to something the humans couldn't hear. And then, apparently satisfied with whatever they had perceived, began to eat their morning hay. The lambs slept on. The doves, tucked in their pairs in the upper deck, did not open their eyes. Outside, the world was changing. The rain was falling everywhere. Not in the patchy, variable way of normal rainfall, but with a comprehensive evenness that left no dry place anywhere on the visible earth. The ground, which had been dry and firm, was softening. The small depressions in the landscape were filling with water, linking up, becoming puddles, becoming pools. The river, that clear, cold river that had been running over its smooth stones since before anyone could remember, was rising, its banks disappearing, its familiar edges dissolving into the spreading water. And the ark, that enormous structure that had sat on dry land for so long, solid and immovable and slightly absurd looking, began, almost imperceptibly at first, to lift. It happened so gradually that no single moment could be identified as the moment it occurred. The water simply rose around it, and the ark rose with the water. And at some point, the keel was no longer resting on the earth, but floating above it. And the ark was doing exactly what it had always been designed to do. It was floating. Inside, the change in sensation was subtle but unmistakable. The slight, gentle rocking, barely perceptible at first. Just the faintest suggestion of movement beneath the feet, like standing on a very large, very stable raft. Noah's wife felt it first, the way women often feel subtle physical changes before anyone else does. And she put her hand against the wall and felt the living movement in the wood, and looked at her husband with an expression that contained many things at once. Wonder, and something like relief, and the particular emotion that has no simple name, the one that arrives when something you have trusted for a very long time is proven right. It floats, her expression said. Of course it does, his answered. The rocking, as the water deepened and the ark settled fully into its new element, developed into something that I want to describe very carefully, because it is the central image of this whole night's story. It was not the rocking of a ship in a storm, that violent, lurching, disorienting movement that makes the horizon disappear and the stomach rebel and every solid thing feel suddenly unreliable. The ark was too large for that, and too solidly built. And the water, in those early days, was rising more than it was churning. Power. The movement was something else entirely. It was a cradle rocking. Long, slow, rhythmic sweeps. A gentle rise on one side and a gentle fall on the other. Back and forth, with the particular regularity of something that has found its natural rhythm and settled into it. The kind of movement that doesn't disturb sleep but deepens it. The kind of movement that a body recognizes in some deep ancestral way as safe. The movement of being held and gently moved by something larger than yourself. something that has you completely and is not going to let go. The animals felt it too. The horses, after their initial adjustment, stopped shifting and stood with their heads low, rocking gently with the ark's movement in that way that horses sometimes stand in sunlight, half asleep, utterly relaxed. The cattle settled deeper into their hay. The bears, those great shaggy creatures that spend half their lives in profound unconsciousness anyway, barely stirred at all. The cats, whatever wild cats had come aboard, their eyes closed and their paws tucked neatly beneath their chests, purred. The ark rocked, and the animals slept. And the rain fell on the roof in its steady drumming rhythm, and the combination of sounds. The rain above, and the water around, and the deep, slow creaking of the timber, and the breathing of thousands of sleeping creatures, created something that was, against every reasonable expectation, profoundly peaceful. God was holding the ark. I want to say that plainly, without dressing it up or making it more complicated than it is. The ancient text describes the waters covering the earth, the mountains disappearing beneath the flood, the entirety of the old world transformed into a vast and featureless sea. It is, by any measure, a scene of enormous loss and sorrow. And in the middle of that scene, there is this small wooden vessel, no bigger than a modern cargo ship, rocking on the face of the deep. And God remembered Noah. Those are the exact words the ancient text uses, and they have always stopped me cold because of what they imply. God remembered, as if in the middle of all of it, in the middle of the vast grief and the comprehensive rain and the ending of the old world, God's attention was specifically, particularly, individually focused on one man and his family and the creatures entrusted to his care. Not as a general benevolence toward the universe, not as a distant management of large-scale events, but as a specific, personal, attentive remembering. I see you. I know where you are. I have not forgotten. That is the word at the center of the flood story. If you're looking for one, not judgment, not water, not even survival, remembered. God remembered Noah. And because God remembered, the ark was held. And because the ark was held, the animals slept. And because the animals slept, the cradle in the storm rocked on through the rain, night after night, carrying its cargo of warm, breathing life through the deep waters of the ending of one world and the beginning of another. On the first night of the rain, Noah sat in his corner of the middle deck and listened. The rain on the roof, the water against the sides, the creaking of the great beams as the ark moved, the breathing of his family settled into sleep around him. The deeper, more various breathing of all the creatures on the decks above and below, the rumble of the large ones, the quick flutter of the birds, the barely audible respiration of the small ones tucked into their corners. He sat with all of it and felt something he had not expected to feel. Gratitude. Not the performed gratitude of someone saying the right words. The real kind. The kind that arrives unexpectedly and sits in the chest like warmth. The kind that makes you want to simply be still and receive it. Gratitude for the years of work that had produced this solid, reliable shelter. Gratitude for his sons and their wives. All of them safe and present. Gratitude for the creatures. These extraordinary, varied, beautiful creatures, sleeping their animal sleep all around him, trusting without knowing they were trusting. Gratitude for the rain itself. Even now, even knowing what it meant for the world outside, because the rain was evidence of a God who was still paying attention, still acting, still present in history even when his presence took a form that was difficult to hold. And underneath all of it, the most fundamental gratitude of all, that he had not been left out here alone. That the same God who had told him to build the ark had gotten into the ark with him, metaphorically speaking, and was riding out the storm alongside him. He was not alone in the dark. None of them were. The rain fell all through that first night, and the night after that, and the night after that, and every night, inside the cradle in the storm, the same thing happened. The lamps burned low. The family settled into their pallets. The animals grew still. The great, slow rocking of the ark established its rhythm. And somewhere in the middle of that rhythm, in the warm, breathing dark, surrounded by the sound of the rain, and the sound of the water, and the sound of all that trusting life, sleep came. Gentle as a hand placed softly on a shoulder, patient as the rain itself, complete as only the sleep of the truly held can be. Let the ark rock you now. Feel it. If you can, that long, slow, rhythmic sway. Back and forth, rise and fall. The same movement that rocked the animals to sleep. The same movement that carried Noah's family through 40 nights of rain. The same movement that the body recognizes in some place deeper than thought as the movement of being held. The rain may be falling in your own life right now. The waters may be rising around something you love, something you've built, something you were counting on to stay dry. I don't know what storm you're carrying into sleep tonight, but I know this. The same God who closed the door of the ark is aware of where you are. The same attentiveness that remembered Noah in the middle of the flood is directed toward you. Right now, in this room, in this moment, you are inside something that was built to hold you. The water can rise as high as it rises. The rain can fall as long as it falls. The cradle will rock, and the cradle will hold, and the morning will come. And when it does, God will still be there, and so will you. For now, though, sleep. Let the rocking take you. Let the rain on the roof become a lullaby. Let your body grow heavy and your mind grow soft and the warm, breathing dark of the ark gather you in. You are remembered. You are held. Rest. Time moves differently on water. This is something sailors have always known, and something that is almost impossible to explain to someone who has never experienced it. On land, time is marked by landmarks. You pass this hill. You reach that village. You arrive at the familiar gate of home. Progress is visible, measurable, anchored to the fixed geography of the world around you. But on water, especially on open water with no shore in sight, the landscape never changes. You look out in every direction, and you see the same thing: water and sky and the line where they meet, and nothing else. And in that sameness, the ordinary markers of time dissolve. An hour can feel like a day. A day can feel like an hour. The usual urgency that drives life forward, the need to get somewhere, to accomplish something, to arrive, loses its grip. Inside the ark, floating on the face of the deep with no shore anywhere beneath the horizon, time became something soft and unhurried, something that could be inhabited rather than managed. The 40 days of rain were, in their way, a gift. I want to take you through an ordinary day inside the ark, because I think it's in the ordinariness of it that the real beauty lives. The mornings began with the animals, before the family was fully awake, before anyone had eaten or prayed or said good morning to each other. The animals had needs that had to be met. The horses needed water and hay. The cattle needed their stalls cleaned. The birds needed seed and fresh water in their small clay dishes. The larger creatures, the elephants, the hippos, whatever enormous things had taken up residence on the lower deck, needed quantities of food that required real effort to provide. The hauling and distributing of enormous amounts of vegetation that had been carefully stored in the ark's hold before the door was sealed. This work, repeated every morning without exception, was itself a kind of gift. There is something deeply stabilizing about having a necessary task. When the external world has become incomprehensible, when everything you knew has been replaced by an endless gray sea and an endless gray sky and the sound of rain that doesn't stop, having a clear, concrete, physical thing to do is an anchor. You may not understand what is happening to the world. You may not be able to see the shore or calculate when this will end. But you know that the horses need water, and you can do that. You know that the birds need feeding, and you can do that. The task is manageable. The task is real. The task connects you to the living world around you and reminds you that you have a role in it, a purpose, a reason to get up and move through the hours. Noah's family had tasks, and the tasks held them. Picture the middle of an ordinary morning, perhaps 2 weeks into the rain. The sound of water is so constant by now that it has ceased to be noticeable. It has become the background against which everything else happens. The way the sound of your own heartbeat is always there but rarely heard. The ark creaks and shifts in its slow, reliable way. The light coming through the single window near the top of the vessel is gray and diffuse, filtered through clouds so thick and low that there is no longer any clear distinction between sky and rain. Just a uniform, soft, silver-gray luminosity that fills the ark with a kind of gentle twilight even in the middle of the day. Noah's wife is in the cooking area of the family's living space, working with the stores of dried grain and preserved food. The smell of something warming over a small clay brazier fills the space. Something simple, something that smells of cumin and dried herbs and olive oil. A smell that is home in its most elemental form. She works with the economy of movement, of someone who has been cooking in small spaces for a long time, reaching for what she needs without looking, her hands knowing their work. One of the daughters-in-law sits nearby and grinding grain with a small hand mill, the rhythmic, circular motion producing a soft, steady sound that has become part of the ark's soundscape. Her arms move in their slow circles, and her mind, you can tell, is somewhere else. Perhaps with the home she left behind, the neighbors she won't see again, the particular view from a particular window that no longer exists. But her hands keep moving, because the grain needs grinding, and the meal needs making. And grief and necessity have always had to coexist. On the upper deck, Shem is checking the birds. He moves along the rows of perches and nesting spaces with a lamp in one hand and a cloth in the other. Quietly, so as not to disturb the ones that are still sleeping. He pauses at a pair of doves tucked close together on their perch, their feathers so perfectly interleaved that they look like a single creature. He watches them for a moment. There is something about their absolute, uncomplicated peace that steadies him. They are not worrying. They are not calculating how many more days of rain there might be. They are simply here, together, warm and resting. He moves on. The afternoons were the longest part of the day. The mornings had their work, and the evenings had their gathering and their shared meals, and the particular warmth of family in close quarters at the end of the day. But the afternoons, those long, gray, waterlogged hours in the middle of the day when the work was done, but the evening hadn't arrived yet, those were the hours that required a different kind of management. Ham, who had always been the most physically restless of the three brothers, spent the afternoons doing laps, not running. The space didn't allow for that, but walking the perimeter of the middle deck in slow circuits, his hand trailing along the wall, his feet finding the same path over and over. It was not exciting. It was not particularly comfortable, but it used the body, and using the body quieted the mind. And quieting the mind was, in those long gray afternoons, a form of survival. Japheth spent the afternoons in a corner of the upper deck that had become his particular territory, sitting with his knees drawn up, thinking. He was the most interior of the brothers, the one most comfortable with the long corridors of his own mind. And the Ark gave him more time inside those corridors than he'd ever had before. He thought about what the world would look like when they arrived somewhere. He thought about what it meant to be, as far as anyone knew, among the only human beings left alive. He thought about the animals sleeping around him, the extraordinary trust of their presence, the weight of the responsibility that represented. He thought about God, not in a theological way, not constructing arguments or analyzing doctrine, but in the simple, wondering way of someone who has seen too much to remain comfortable with easy answers and is learning, slowly, to be at peace with the mystery. The evenings were different. In the evenings, the family gathered. This was not formally arranged. No one announced it or scheduled it. It simply happened. The way necessary things happen in small groups of people who have been in close quarters long enough to develop their own organic rhythms. As the gray light from the window faded and the lamps were lit, people drifted toward the family's central space, finding their usual spots, settling in. They talked. They told stories, not about the flood, not about the future, but the old stories, the family stories, the kind that begin "Do you remember when?" and end in laughter, or in the particular gentle sadness of something beloved and past. Noah's wife told stories about her own childhood that her sons had heard dozens of times and still wanted to hear again. Because that is what beloved stories are for. Noah told stories about his own father and his father's father. Stories that stretched back into a time before any of them were born. Stories that connected them to a chain of people and moments that went back, in one direction, as far as human memory could reach. And sometimes, in the evenings, they sang quietly, not the exuberant singing of celebration, but the slower, more private singing of people who need music the way they need food. Simple melodies, the kind that have no complicated harmonies, just a single line of sound moving through the warm, lamplit air. The animals on the surrounding decks seemed to respond to this. The restlessness that sometimes built up in the long afternoons, a low-level unease, a subtle agitation that moved through the larger animals like a slow current, dissipated when the singing started. The horses' ears swiveled toward the sound. The cattle stopped their occasional shifting. Even the birds went quieter. Music, it turns out, works on every creature that breathes. It is one of the deep things, one of the things written into the fabric of living beings, older than language, older than theology, older than almost everything. Noah, through all of this, was learning something. He had built the ark. He had organized the gathering, overseen the provisioning, managed the enormous practical complexity of getting this whole enterprise sealed and floating. He had been, for years, the one who kept things moving, the one with the plan, the one who got up every morning and went back to work. But now, floating in the middle of an unknowable sea with the rain still falling, and no shore anywhere in sight. There was nothing to build and nowhere to go. The next step was not something he could take. It would happen when it happened, in God's timing. And all he could do in the meantime was be here. Feed the animals. Sit with his family. Pray his quiet prayers. Rest. This turned out to be its own kind of learning. Perhaps the deeper kind. There is a particular spiritual maturity that only becomes available when you have run out of things to do. When the project is finished and the door is closed and the outcome is no longer in your hands. When all the competence and industriousness and faithful hard work that got you here has brought you to a place where the only thing left is trust. Pure, uncomplicated, nothing else to fall back on trust. Noah floated on the face of the deep and practiced that trust. Day after day. In the long gray afternoons, and the warm lamplit evenings, and the quiet moments before sleep, when the rain drummed on the roof, and the ark rocked its steady rock, and there was nothing to do but be held. He was being changed by this, though he couldn't have said exactly how. The man who would walk off the ark when the door finally opened would be the same man who had walked onto it, but something in him would have been simplified, distilled, made quieter and deeper and more essentially itself. 40 days of floating will do that to a person. And the animals slept. Through all of it, the gray mornings and the restless afternoons and the singing evenings and the long nights of rain. The animals maintained their extraordinary, improbable calm. There were difficult moments. There were days when the swell increased and the ark's movement became less like a cradle and more like something that needed managing. And the horses grew tense in their stalls and needed calming. And the birds fluttered anxiously in the upper reaches until the motion passed. There were nights when the rain seemed louder than usual, and some creature in the lower decks made a sound that set off a brief chain of responses through the other animals before gradually subsiding back into silence. But mostly, the animals slept. They slept with the deep, uncomplicated sleep of creatures who have been placed somewhere safe by a hand they trust without question. They slept the sleep of the surrendered, the sleep of those who have given up the management of their own safety to something larger than themselves and found, in that surrender, a rest they couldn't have achieved any other way. The lambs tucked their legs beneath them and closed their eyes. The bears breathed their enormous, slow breaths. The doves slept pressed together on their perch, warm and still. And the rain fell, and the ark rocked, and the days accumulated into weeks, and the weeks moved through their gray, unhurried passage. And God held the cradle in his hands and did not put it down. There is a version of faith that is all motion, building, planning, acting, moving forward. Noah knew that version. He had lived it for years, one plank at a time. But there is another version, quieter, and in some ways harder, that only becomes available when the building is done, and the door is closed, and the water is rising, and there is literally nothing left to do but float. That version of faith looks a lot like rest. It looks like lying down in the warm dark and letting the rocking take you. It looks like trusting that the door was properly sealed by hands that know what they're doing. It looks like eating your meal and tending the animals and singing your quiet songs and going to sleep. Not because you're certain everything will be fine, but because you trust the one who is holding the boat. That is where Noah was, floating in the middle of 40 days of rain, and in a quieter way. Perhaps it is where you are tonight. Whatever you've been building, whatever you've been working toward, there comes a moment when the work is done and the door closes and the outcome passes out of your hands. And in that moment, the only thing left is to float, to let yourself be rocked, to trust the hands that sealed the door. You've done what you could do. Now let the ark do what it was built to do. Let the rain fall. Let the water rise. Let the rocking take you deeper and deeper into the rest you've been needing. The rest that only comes when you finally stop trying to manage the storm and let yourself be held by the one who is managing it for you. The animals know how to do this. They've been doing it all along. Watch them a moment. In your mind's eye. The sleeping lambs. The breathing bears. The doves pressed together on their perch. Utterly still. Now close your eyes. The ark is holding you. The rain is falling. The rocking is slow and deep and absolutely reliable. 40 days. 40 nights. And every single one of them held. Now I have full context. Let me write chapters 7 and 8 according to the prompt system's style guidelines. Slow, immersive, sleep-oriented, cock, tender narration, English script. The rain had become the world. Not just the weather, the whole world. The rhythm of it. The texture of every day. The sound that greeted you when you woke, and the sound that accompanied you when you finally closed your eyes at night. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain had been the constant, the given, the one thing you could count on with absolute certainty. It will rain. It is raining. It will rain again. And then one morning, it stopped. Not dramatically. There was no sudden silence. No thunderclap of ending. It was more like the way a piece of music fades. So gradually that you're not sure, at first, whether it has truly finished or whether it is simply resting between phrases. Noah woke in the gray early light and lay still for a moment, listening. The drumming on the upper deck had softened. The particular percussion of heavy rain against the wood. That sound he'd been hearing for so long, it had become the background texture of thought itself, had thinned to something lighter. A pattering, and then less than a pattering, and then, almost without his being able to say exactly when, nothing at all. He lay there in the stillness. The silence after very long rain is one of the quietest things in the world. It has a quality to it that ordinary silence doesn't. A density, an almost physical presence, as if the air itself is catching its breath. Noah had not heard this silence in 40 days. He had forgotten, in those 40 days, what it felt like. Now it settled over the ark, like something being gently placed. Somewhere in the lower deck, one of the animals stirred. A low sound, not distress, just a kind of quiet acknowledgement. Something shifting in its sleep, perhaps sensing the change before it fully understood it. Then stillness again. Noah sat up slowly and looked toward the small opening where pale light came through. The light was different. He couldn't have said exactly how. Not yet. Just different. Something in its quality, its temperature, suggested that the sky above had changed. He dressed quietly, in the way of a man who has lived for weeks in close company and learned to move softly through shared space. He climbed toward the upper deck. The clouds were still thick, still gray, still covering everything from horizon to horizon. The water was as vast and featureless as it had been every day. There was no land visible. Nothing to suggest that the world below that water still existed. But the rain had stopped, and the wind had changed. There was a drier quality to it now, something that carried in it, faintly, the idea of distance, as if somewhere far away, beyond the edge of what could be seen. The air was different. Noah stood on the upper deck for a long time. The water around the ark was still. Without the constant disturbance of falling rain, the surface had settled into a vast, dark mirror, reflecting the cloud-covered sky back at itself. The ark sat in the middle of that mirror, motionless, the only solid thing in an endless world of water and gray. It was, in its way, extraordinarily peaceful. There is a kind of peace that lives on the other side of the storm. A peace that is richer and, more specifically, textured than the peace that existed before the storm began. You only know it by contrast. You only recognize its depth because you have spent time in the other thing. Noah stood in that peace on the upper deck and breathed slowly. And something in him, without being asked, quietly gave thanks. Days passed after the rain stopped. The water did not immediately recede. It was too much water, accumulated from too many days of continuous rain to drain away in an afternoon. It receded slowly, imperceptibly, the way a tide goes out. You couldn't watch it happen. You could only compare one morning to another and notice, gradually, that the surface of the water seemed slightly lower relative to some landmark on the ark. Or that something, a distant dark smudge on the horizon, seemed marginally more defined than it had been. Noah began watching for land. He didn't do it anxiously. That would have been the old way. the way of a man who needs to see the outcome in order to trust the process. He watched the way a person watches a sunrise, with patient attention, with the understanding that it will come when it comes, and that watching more intently won't make it come faster. He stood on the upper deck in the mornings and let his eyes move slowly across the horizon, not demanding anything, just remaining open to whatever might appear. And then one day, he decided to try something. Among the birds on the ark, there were ravens. Large, dark, intelligent creatures who had always seemed slightly more alert than the others, slightly more aware of their surroundings. Noah released one. He opened the covering and let the raven out into the open air, and watched it circle up and away from the ark in long, unhurried spirals, its black wings catching the gray light. It did not find land. It flew back and forth across the face of the waters, perhaps resting on the ark itself occasionally, until something changed. Then Noah turned to the doves. If the raven was the pragmatic choice, a tough, adaptable bird that could survive, the dove was something else. Smaller, quieter, dependent on the gentler things of the world. Seeds, grain, fresh green growth. If a dove came back, she had found nothing. If she stayed away, something had changed. He lifted her gently from her perch. She was warm in his hands. Her heart beat a small, quick flutter. Her feathers soft and dry. She looked up at him with one of her smooth, round eyes, tilting her head with the particular attentiveness of a bird paying careful attention to a face. He brought her to the opening and released her into the open air. She circled once, twice, and then flew out across the water, growing smaller, becoming a small pale shape against the gray sky, and then nothing at all. He waited. There is something particular about the waiting after you have sent a small, gentle thing out into uncertainty. Something that has no precise name but is somewhere in the vicinity of prayer, of tenderness, of the held breath that comes when you care about an outcome but cannot control it. Noah waited through the rest of that day, through the long afternoon and the slow early evening, and the dove did not come back. When darkness came, he accepted it. He went down to the lower deck, ate his evening meal, tended the animals, and lay down. He slept without difficulty. He had become, through 40 days of floating, a man who had learned to let go of outcomes before they were resolved. But in the very last light of the following evening, that particular amber window just before full dark, there was a sound at the opening above. A small sound. A soft landing. And there was the dove. She was back, and she had brought something with her. Held in her beak, plucked from somewhere out across the great expanse of water, was a small green leaf, an olive leaf, still fresh, impossibly, improbably fresh, still soft, still carrying in it the particular smell of a living plant. A smell so specific and so long absent from the ark that Noah recognized it instantly. The way you recognize a smell from childhood, not remembering it intellectually, but simply knowing it. Deep in the body, in some part of you that predates words. He took the leaf from her gently. He turned it in his fingers. It was green. It was alive. Somewhere out there. Not far. Perhaps. But somewhere. The world that had gone under the water was beginning. With extraordinary patience. To come back. He showed the leaf to his wife first. She had been in the lower deck, tending to the young goats. When she heard his footstep on the ladder and looked up, there was something in his face, a quality of stillness that was different from the ordinary stillness of the past weeks, a stillness that held something inside it. She straightened up and looked at him, and then at what was in his hand. She crossed the space between them and took the leaf from him. She held it in both hands, the way you might hold something fragile and precious, something you weren't sure how to hold. She brought it close and looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at him. Neither of them said anything for a while. There are some things for which language simply isn't sufficient. Not because language fails, but because the moment is full enough without it. They stood together in the lamp-lit warmth of the lower deck, surrounded by the soft breathing of the animals, holding a small green leaf, and understood in their bodies and their hearts what it meant before either of them found words for it. It was the first new thing. The first thing in this whole long journey that belonged to the other side, to the world that was returning, to the life that would eventually come after the waiting. This small, improbable, utterly ordinary leaf was a doorway. Not yet an arrival, but the first unmistakable glimpse of the destination. 7 more days passed, and Noah sent the dove out again. She was gone longer this time. He waited through the morning, through the afternoon, through the particular slant of light in the early evening that he had come to associate with the hour just before the world decided something. And then, just as the last light was beginning to soften, she didn't come back. She had found somewhere to land. She had found a branch, a tree, a patch of dry ground solid enough to hold her weight. She had found the world coming back, and she had stayed in it. Noah stood at the opening for a long time after the sky grew dark. He felt her absence differently than he had expected. Not as a loss, but as something more like a graduation. She had done what she was made to do. The world outside had enough in it now to hold her, and she had gone to it. This was right. This was good. This was what endings are supposed to look like. He went down to tell his family. And that night, in the ark that had become their home, they allowed themselves something they hadn't permitted themselves in a very long time: the quiet, tentative joy of people who have begun to believe. For the first time in weeks, that the story is moving towards something good. Let that image settle with you for a moment tonight. A small green leaf. After all that gray, after all that water, after all that waiting, not a trumpet blast, not a parting of the clouds, not a dramatic sign written across the sky, just a dove and a leaf and the smell of something living. Hope does not always arrive the way we expect it. It often comes in small, quiet ways. The one green thing in the middle of the gray. The small return after a long absence. The tiny sign that asks you to keep waiting without being able to tell you exactly how much longer. It comes in sizes that seem almost too small for the amount of relief they carry. But if you have been in the gray long enough, even the smallest green thing is enough. Even a single leaf is sufficient evidence that the world is not all water. Hold that leaf in your mind's eye tonight. Let its green be the last thing you carry into sleep. Whatever waiting you are in, whatever stretch of gray days you have been moving through, whatever long and shapeless middle you are floating across, the dove has gone out. The leaf is coming. Not yet, perhaps, but coming. Rest now. Let the ark rock you gently toward morning. The ground was dry. It took a while to trust it. After so many weeks of water, of floating, of the world as an endless liquid horizon, the idea of solid ground felt almost theoretical. Noah had been told it was coming, had held the leaf, had watched the dove not return. He had known, in his mind, that the water was receding. But knowing a thing in your mind and trusting it in your body are different things entirely. And on the morning that the covering was finally removed from the ark, and Noah looked out and saw land, actual earth, actual solid unmoving ground, something in him went very quiet, in a way that was not quite the same as any quietness he had experienced before. He didn't rush. That might surprise you. After all this time, after the months of floating, the weeks of waiting, the long gray patience of 40 days and 40 more, you might expect that the moment the way was clear, everyone would pour out of the ark as fast as possible, gasping for open air and solid ground. But Noah stood at the opening for a long time and simply looked at the washed, still, pale morning world, looked at the mountains emerging from the retreating water, dark and streaked with moisture, looked at the sky, which was doing something extraordinary. He hadn't seen the sun properly in a very long time. Not this sun. Not full morning sun with clear air around it. Not the sun, the way it looks when the sky is genuinely open and the clouds have pulled back completely and there is nothing between you and that enormous ancient light. For months, the sun had been a rumor, a slightly brighter patch behind gray cloud cover. But on this morning, as he stood in the opening of the ark and looked out at the new world. The sky was different. The sky was clean. The light that came with a clean sky after very long rain has a quality that is almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. It is sharper than ordinary light. More specific, it reaches things. The edges of leaves, the surfaces of stones, the wet bark of trees, with a precision that makes everything look slightly more real than usual, as if the world has been briefly, tenderly redrawn in finer detail. Noah stood in that light and breathed. The smell of the air was extraordinary. It had in it everything at once. The deep earthen smell of ground that has been soaked and is now exposed to sun for the first time. The green smell of plants beginning to stir and unfurl and reach upward. The clean, cold smell of high air off the mountains. And underneath all of it, something that took a moment to identify. The smell of the world beginning. The smell of after. The smell of the first morning of something new. God spoke, as he had spoken at the beginning of all things, in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the moment that might seem unremarkable until you understand what is being said. He spoke now. Come out of the ark. And so they did. Noah first, and then his wife, and then their sons, and then the sons' wives. 8 people stepping down from the ark onto solid ground, each one placing their feet on the actual earth and feeling, I imagine, a brief involuntary pause of disbelief, a moment of adjustment as the body relearned what ground felt like after so many weeks of nothing but moving water beneath a wooden floor. And then the animals. This was the part. If you were watching from some vantage point above, that must have looked like a quiet miracle in itself. The doors opened, and out they came. Every creature, every bird, everything that crept and crawled and walked and leaped. Not in panic, not in a chaotic scramble. Steadily, the way they had come, patiently, at their own pace, each one finding the opening and stepping out into the morning air and, in their way, encountering the world again. The birds went first. Of course, the birds went first. They were suited for it, built for exactly this. And they spiraled up from the opening in groups of 2 and 3 and scattered into the pale morning sky with something that, in a bird, might be the closest thing to joy available. The small creatures followed, and then the larger ones, blinking in the bright morning, stretching, smelling, discovering with all their senses that the world was still here, still full of exactly the things a world is supposed to be full of. The animals spread out across the washed earth. There is something in this image worth sitting with. 2 of every creature, stepping off the ark and into a world that was still settling, still drying, still finding its shape after the long covering of water. A world that needed to be filled again. They were In a very literal sense, the world's second beginning. The deer moved off into the trees, which were still dripping with moisture, the leaves catching the morning light. The bears found a slope and began, in their unhurried way, to investigate it. The birds filled the air above with movement, wheeling patterns of wings against blue sky, the sound of calling that must have seemed, after all those weeks of carefully modulated quiet inside the ark, almost overwhelming in its freedom and abundance. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, a pair of doves found a branch to land on. They sat together, pressed close the way doves do, and looked out at the morning with their small, attentive eyes. They had made this journey. They had ridden inside the cradle through all the dark water. And now here was the branch. Here was the morning. Here was the olive tree, beginning its slow and patient recovery. Here was everything. Noah built an altar. It was the first thing he did on solid ground. Before shelter, before planting, before any of the practical work of beginning again. He gathered stones from the newly exposed earth and built a place to offer something back. A thank offering. The kind of offering that has no agenda, no request, no petition, just gratitude given freely, in acknowledgement of what had been received. There is something in that instinct worth noticing. After everything he had been through, the years of building, the long wait before the rain, the months of floating, the patience of the gray days and the long nights, his first act on solid ground was not to collapse, not to immediately begin the work of survival, but to stop and give thanks. There are people who only give thanks when things are easy. And there are people who give thanks when things are hard, because they have learned, through exactly the kind of long, gray, rootless passage that Noah had just come through, that gratitude is not a response to circumstances. It is a practice. It is the habit of a soul that has learned to recognize, even in the most difficult things, the presence of the one who was holding it through all of them. Noah had spent 40 days and 40 nights being held. He knew who had been doing the holding. And then, the rainbow. God spoke again. And what he said was this: I am making a covenant with you, and with your children after you, and with every living creature. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. And as a sign of that covenant, a visible, tangible, recurring sign, written in the sky itself, visible to every creature on earth whenever rain clouds gather. He set a bow in the clouds. The rainbow. Think about that choice for a moment. Of all the signs that could have been given, a carved stone, a written law, a ritual to be performed on specific days. The sign is a natural phenomenon. Its light refracted through water. It appears whenever sun and rain exist together, whenever the storm is still in the sky, but the light is already breaking through. It is, of all things, The sign written exactly at the intersection of what has been difficult and what is beginning to be beautiful. You don't see rainbows when the storm is fully overhead. You don't see them in clear sky. You see them in that particular moment when the rain is still in the air, but the sun has found an angle. When the difficult thing is still present, but the light has returned. That is the moment when the covenant appears. That is when God says, I remember. I see you. I am with you. Every time. For as long as there are rain clouds and sun. Without exception. This was the promise. Not that there would be no more storms. Not that the water would never rise or the sky would never go gray. But that after the rain, in the particular moment when the difficult thing is still in the air, but the light has returned, you would see it, written across the sky in the language of color. 7 colors, arching from horizon to horizon, a signature, a reminder, a covenant renewed. Noah looked up at it for a long time. There is something about the ending of this story that makes it one of the most quietly hopeful things in all of Scripture. Not because everything is perfect. The world that Noah and his family stepped into was changed, was washed, was empty in ways that would take generations to fill. They were 8 people on a very large, very quiet piece of ground, with all of creation spread out around them, and the work of beginning again stretched out before them. It was not an easy situation. It was not the comfortable return to the life they had left. But it was new. It was clean. And it was full of the particular quality of grace that comes specifically to people who have passed through hard things and emerged on the other side of them. Not unchanged, but intact. Not the same, but whole. The ark had done what it was built to do. The cradle had held them through the storm. And now the door was open, and the ground was dry, and the rainbow was in the sky, and the whole world, washed and waiting, was spread out before them. This is where I want to leave you tonight. Not in the middle of the 40 days. Not in the gray of the long waiting. But here, at the open door, with the morning light coming in, with the smell of new earth and the sound of the birds scattering into the sky, with the rainbow above and solid ground beneath. Whatever storm you have been in, whatever long, gray, waterlogged stretch of days you have been moving through, the door is not going to stay closed forever. The water has an ending. The rain has an ending. The waiting has an ending. It comes when it comes. In God's timing, not ours. We don't get to choose the morning. But the morning comes. And when it does, the first thing you'll notice is the smell of the air. That specific, extraordinary smell. The earth after rain. The green beginning. The world resuming its slow and patient life after the long interruption. And somewhere above you, if you look at the right moment, where the remaining clouds meet the returning sun, you may see it, the sign, arching across the sky, saying what it always says. I remember. I am here. It is enough. So tonight, as you settle into sleep, let the story settle with you. Let the ark hold you one more time. The way it held Noah, the way it held the animals, the way it held the whole patient cargo of the world through 40 days of not knowing. Let the rocking be your breathing. Slow and steady and absolutely reliable. Let the warmth around you be the warmth of the lower deck. Lamplit and hay-scented and full of the breath of living things. You are not lost on the water. You are held on it. The door is sealed, and the one who sealed it knows what he is doing. The rain falls, and the rain will stop. And somewhere out there, in God's timing, not yours, a dove is already finding its branch. A leaf is already waiting to be found. A morning is already on its way, bringing with it the smell of new earth and the light of a rainbow and the solid ground of everything that comes after. Rest now. The ark is still. The water is quiet. Somewhere above you, in the dark, the stars have come out, those ancient, faithful stars that never went anywhere, that were there before the rain and are there after it, steady and silver and unconcerned, doing what they have always done, keeping vigil over the sleeping world. You have been held through hard things. You will be held through hard things still to come. But tonight, there is nothing to hold except the quiet, the stillness, the warmth, the very end of a very long story, arriving exactly where it was always meant to arrive. Close your eyes. The dove has found her branch. The rainbow is in the sky. And you, like everything that rode the ark, are safe and resting and home. Good night.